What happens when a Filipino man is wrongfully accused of a crime, only to later save a life in the most unexpected way? Can a simple misunderstanding turn into a moment of heroism? How does one prove their worth when society judges them unfairly? Find out how one man's courage turned the tables in this gripping story. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The sun blazed brightly overhead, casting a warm glow over Westfield Mall in Los Angeles. The weekend had arrived, and the mall buzzed with the lively chatter of shoppers, families enjoying their free time, and couples leisurely strolling hand in hand. Among them walked Dr. Jason Ramirez, an experienced emergency doctor known for his calm demeanor in the most chaotic of situations. Today, however, he wasn't in his usual fast-paced environment. He was here for some much-needed errands. Jason wore a simple polo shirt and jeans, his attire casual and unremarkable. His days in the emergency room were filled with life-or-death decisions, but today was different. Today, he was just another face in the crowd, enjoying a few quiet moments in the bustling mall. He had no desire for attention, preferring instead to blend in. With a small smile, he glanced at the various storefronts as he passed, his mind momentarily distracted by the little things, the bright colors of summer clothes on display, the fragrant scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting from a nearby cafe. As he made his way toward the electronics store, Jason's thoughts turned to the latest tech gadgets. His smartwatch was starting to feel outdated, and he figured it was time to treat himself to a new one. Walking into the store, he was greeted by rows of sparkling new devices on sleek shelves, each one showcasing the latest in technology. His eyes wandered over the shiny displays, and his hand instinctively reached out to pick up a model that caught his attention. Jason was deep in thought as he inspected the features of the smartwatch. The screen was clear and vibrant, and the design was much sleeker than his old one. He could almost feel the excitement of owning something new. But then, as he scanned the store, a strange feeling washed over him. It wasn't the typical buzz of excitement that he usually felt when exploring new tech. It was a sense that he was being watched. His instincts, honed over years in the medical field, kicked in. Something was off. He couldn't explain it, but he felt eyes on him, not the casual glances of fellow shoppers, but a steady, intense gaze. Turning subtly, he spotted the security guard standing near the entrance, watching him with a cold and unblinking stare. Jason frowned, trying to shake off the feeling. Surely it was nothing. Maybe the guard was just doing his job, but the sensation persisted, a lingering unease gnawing at the back of his mind. Jason's attention remained fixed on the smartwatch, the sleek design and advanced features pulling him in. Yet, an unsettling feeling crept up his spine. It wasn't the excitement of finding a new gadget. No, it was something far more uncomfortable. He could sense it. Someone was watching him. His gaze flicked around the store, and there, near the entrance, stood Mike Carter, the security officer. Mike's eyes were fixed on him, unwavering and cold, a judgmental stare that seemed to analyze every movement Jason made. Jason quickly turned his attention back to the smartwatch, trying to push the feeling aside. It was nothing, he told himself, but the unease lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. A few moments later, Mike began to approach him, his pace measured and deliberate. Jason could feel the officer's eyes on him with every step. Mike stopped a few feet away, blocking his path. The air between them seemed to tighten, and Jason's heart rate quickened. "I'm going to need to check your bag," Mike said, his voice firm, a trace of suspicion in every word. Jason blinked, taken aback. "What? I haven't done anything wrong," he replied, confusion creeping into his voice. Mike's eyes narrowed as he crossed his arms. "We've had reports of shoplifting. You match the description of the suspect. I'm going to need to check your bag." Jason's confusion deepened. Shoplifting. The words didn't make sense. He had done nothing wrong. He was just browsing, not taking anything. His frustration began to rise, but he kept his composure. "I haven't taken anything," Jason said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm just looking around. There's no need for this." The officer was unyielding. "I'll be checking your bag. It's just protocol," he insisted, his voice laced with authority. "Hand it over." Jason hesitated for a brief moment, his chest tightening. He was certain this was a mistake. There was no reason for him to be treated like a criminal. But with the crowd starting to gather and the officer standing in front of him, demanding compliance, he reluctantly handed over his messenger bag. Mike quickly unzipped it and rummaged through its contents, his fingers moving briskly. Jason's phone, a notebook, and a stethoscope. Nothing suspicious. There was no hidden item, no stolen goods. Just the things Jason carried daily. Yet Mike's expression didn't change. "This doesn't change anything," he muttered. "You're still coming with me." Jason's heart raced, a mix of disbelief and frustration welling up inside him. "What? On what grounds?" His voice was steadier than he felt, though his fists clenched involuntarily. "You're accusing me of something I didn't do." The officer's grip tightened on his arm. "Just follow me," Mike ordered without another word. Jason stood still for a moment, trying to process the situation. The crowd around them had grown, their whispers filling the air. Some seemed to agree with the officer, others exchanged concerned glances. But all eyes were on Jason now, and he felt the weight of every gaze. Humiliation flooded through him, and his chest tightened in response. The injustice of it stung. Why was this happening? As the officer began to pull him toward the store's entrance, Jason's thoughts raced. He was just an ordinary man doing his errands. What had caused this suspicion? He couldn't fathom why he was being treated this way. Still, he tried to stay calm, knowing that getting upset wouldn't help. Just as they reached the entrance, a loud gasp pierced through the tense air. A cry for help rang out, followed by frantic shouts. People rushed toward the sound, a ripple of panic running through the crowd. Jason's attention snapped toward the source of the commotion, momentarily forgetting about the officer and the crowd that surrounded him. In an instant, everything shifted. Jason's frustration deepened as Mike continued to rifle through his bag. Each item that Mike pulled out, his phone, notebook, and stethoscope, was harmless. Jason was certain there was nothing to find. Yet, despite the clear lack of evidence, Mike refused to let him go. The grip on Jason's arm tightened. "I've done nothing wrong," Jason said, his voice steady but now laced with impatience. "I'm not going anywhere without an explanation. You've checked my bag and there's nothing. Why are you still detaining me?" Mike's response was nothing but silence. His eyes remained fixed on Jason, unwavering and cold. Jason's frustration bubbled to the surface, but he tried to maintain his composure. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but the tension was impossible to ignore. The crowd had grown around them, with some people watching, others whispering. Jason could feel their gazes, some filled with suspicion, others with uncertainty. The murmurs only heightened his discomfort. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why was he being treated like this? Was it because of how he looked, or was there some mistake he couldn't see? "Can someone please explain why this is happening?" Jason asked, his tone rising slightly, though he still kept himself in check. "There's no reason for this. I'm not a criminal." But no one answered. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, no one stepping in and no one speaking up. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken judgment. Jason felt himself becoming more and more isolated as he was pulled closer to the store's entrance. His pulse quickened, and his chest tightened with the sting of humiliation. He tried to keep his calm, he had to, for his own sake. But the feeling of being unjustly accused weighed heavily on him. As they neared the exit, Jason's thoughts raced, but before he could voice his frustration again, a loud gasp broke through the tension. The sound of frantic cries and gasping breaths echoed through the atrium, followed by a chorus of shouts. Jason turned instinctively toward the noise, his doctor's instincts immediately kicking in. A woman, a middle-aged shopper, had collapsed in the middle of the atrium. She was struggling to breathe, her hands clutching her chest as she gasped for air. Her face was pale and her lips were starting to turn blue. The crowd around her was in chaos, some people yelling for help, others too shocked to move. Panic rippled through the onlookers as they stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Without a second thought, Jason broke free from Mike's grip. His training, his years of experience told him what needed to be done. "I'm a doctor," he called out firmly, pushing through the growing crowd. "Give me space." The people hesitated, some reluctantly stepping back to give him room. Jason knelt beside the woman, his hands quickly assessing her condition. She was clearly in distress, struggling to breathe, her pulse weak and erratic. This was serious, likely an allergic reaction. Jason's mind worked quickly, running through the necessary steps. "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" he asked urgently, his voice firm but not panicked. A woman in the crowd, visibly shaking, handed him the life-saving device. Jason didn't hesitate. He injected the EpiPen into the woman's thigh with practiced ease, then tilted her head back slightly to open her airway. Her breathing was shallow, but Jason kept a close watch on her, monitoring her vitals as her condition slowly began to improve. Within minutes, the woman's color began to return. Her breathing steadied, though she remained weak and disoriented. Jason continued to stay by her side, offering calming words as the paramedics arrived and took over. One of the paramedics knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved her life," the paramedic said, his voice full of gratitude. "If you hadn't acted so quickly, this could have ended much worse." Jason gave a nod, his expression calm. He stepped back to allow the paramedics to take over. As they worked to stabilize the woman, Jason's mind shifted, but only slightly. The earlier tension was still there, but now the weight of the situation had changed. His immediate priority had been to save this woman's life, and he had done just that. The crowd had begun to disperse, but some lingered, still murmuring. A few came forward to thank Jason, their faces filled with awe. Jason, however, remained focused, his thoughts still partly on what had just happened with the officer. The moment of heroism had shifted the focus, but in the back of his mind, the sting of being treated as a suspect still burned. Jason wasn't just a man who had saved a life. He was also a man who had been unfairly judged. The thought didn't leave him, but for now, it was overshadowed by the woman he had just helped. Sometimes, his medical skills made all the difference. But today, they had also forced him to confront the bias he never expected to encounter. Jason's training kicked in as he knelt beside Sarah, watching her struggle to breathe. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, and her breaths came in desperate, shallow gasps, an allergic reaction. He recognized the signs immediately. Time was critical. "Sarah, I'm a doctor," Jason said calmly but firmly. "You're going to be okay. We just need to get this under control." He glanced at the crowd, his voice carrying through the anxious murmurs. "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" A woman near the front hesitated, then stepped forward, holding the device out to him. Jason took it without a moment's pause, removing the cap and injecting the shot into Sarah's thigh with practiced ease. He applied gentle pressure to her chest, trying to keep her calm, then tilted her head back slightly to open her airway. Her breathing started to slow, but it wasn't enough. Jason kept his eyes on her face, monitoring every change. "Stay with me, Sarah," he murmured, keeping his voice steady. "Just keep breathing, nice and slow." The color slowly began to return to Sarah's cheeks, and Jason could feel her pulse becoming less erratic. It was working. Slowly but surely she was stabilizing. Jason didn't take his eyes off her, his hands never leaving her side. Every moment felt like an eternity, but he knew he couldn't afford to let up. Minutes passed, and Sarah's breathing became less labored, her gasps turning into deeper, more controlled breaths. Jason could feel the panic in the crowd begin to ebb away as they watched the woman improve. He kept his voice low, offering reassurance as her color returned and her pulse steadied. By the time the paramedics arrived, Sarah was fully conscious, her breathing normalizing. One of the paramedics knelt beside her, checking her vitals and glancing up at Jason. "You saved her life," he said gratefully. "If you hadn't acted so quickly, we might not have been able to get her back in time." Jason nodded, his heart still pounding in his chest, but his hands were steady. He stepped back slightly, allowing the paramedics to take over and transport Sarah to the hospital for further treatment. The crowd, which had grown larger and more nervous, slowly began to disperse. The whispers that had once been full of suspicion now carried a different tone, one of admiration. Some of the onlookers approached Jason to thank him, offering quick words of gratitude. A few even clapped, their faces filled with awe. But Jason, ever humble, simply nodded, focusing on the paramedics as they worked. Mike, the security officer who had caused the earlier tension, was now standing at the edge of the crowd, watching with a lowered head. His face held an expression of shame, but there was also a subtle shift, respect. He didn't say anything, but the unspoken apology was there, written in his posture. Jason took a deep breath, allowing himself a quiet sigh of relief. The chaos had subsided, and Sarah's life was no longer in danger. He glanced at the paramedics as they wheeled her away, feeling a small sense of pride. His quick thinking had made all the difference today, not only in saving Sarah's life, but also in proving, if only to himself, that even in the most uncertain of circumstances, he could stay calm and rise to the challenge. The tension that had once filled the air was now gone, replaced by a quiet respect from those around him. Jason had faced a situation that was unexpected and difficult, but in the end, his compassion and quick action had made all the difference. The crowd had slowly started to disperse, the tension in the air easing as people returned to their shopping. Jason, still processing the events that had unfolded, stood quietly, his gaze following the paramedics as they wheeled Sarah away. He felt a sense of relief, knowing that he had done what was needed in that moment. But before he could reflect any further, he noticed Mike Carter, the security officer, approaching him with an uneasy look on his face. Mike's usual confident posture was gone, replaced with a clear sense of embarrassment. He stopped a few feet away from Jason, shifting awkwardly. I didn't know you were a doctor," he stammered, his voice soft and contrite. "I made a mistake, I assumed. And I shouldn't have. I'm really sorry." Jason met his gaze but said nothing at first. Mike's apology wasn't lost on him, but it wasn't something that could be fixed with words alone. Still, he nodded, acknowledging the officer's change in demeanor. The situation had been stressful, and everyone involved had made mistakes. Jason could understand that. Before he could respond, the store manager appeared, walking quickly toward them. He looked flustered, clearly uncomfortable with the scene that had played out. "Dr. Ramirez, please allow me to apologize on behalf of the store," the manager said, his tone sincere. "This was a terrible misunderstanding. We deeply regret the way you were treated. We would like to make this right. Is there anything we can do?" Jason took a deep breath, then gave the manager a steady look. "I understand, but the real issue here is that no one took the time to ask who I was before making assumptions." His voice remained calm, but there was a firmness behind it. These kinds of things can happen when people jump to conclusions based on appearances without considering the full picture. The manager nodded, clearly chastened. "You're right. We should have handled it differently. We will make sure this doesn't happen again." As the crowd continued to thin, some people approached Jason, offering their thanks for his quick thinking. Their words were heartfelt, and Jason could see the appreciation in their eyes. The tension that had once filled the air had transformed into something much more positive, a quiet admiration for his calmness and action under pressure. Mike, still visibly humbled by the entire experience, stood at the edge of the crowd, his head lowered. Without a word, he retreated from the scene, quietly disappearing into the background. Jason watched him go but didn't feel the need to speak further. Today had been a reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control, but it had also been a chance to show what calm and compassion could achieve, even in the face of uncertainty. As the crowd finally dispersed, Jason took a moment to reflect on what had transpired. He turned to the few who remained and, with calm authority, spoke to them. "We must always treat others with respect. Judging someone based on appearances or assumptions can lead to mistakes. Take a moment before you act." His words resonated with those who had witnessed the incident, and news of his actions quickly spread online. Jason's story became a powerful reminder of the biases that still linger in society and the strength needed to overcome them. In the end, Jason had saved a life, but he had also changed perspectives, proving that character always triumphs over ignorance.